"You need to get that black guy out of here now," whispered manager Carlos Mendez into his walkie-talkie, his eyes fixed on the Chinese businessman crossing the lobby of the Grand Palace Hotel. "I can't have people like that walking around during this meeting." His voice trembled with nervousness as he adjusted his tie for the 5th time in 2 minutes. Li Wei, a real estate billionaire who controlled more than 50 properties in Asia, walked toward the elevators with his entourage of 6 impeccably dressed executives. Carlos had spent 3 weeks preparing for this meeting. The investment of 300 million reis was practically guaranteed, according to his boss. All he had to do was not screw it up. "Mr. Li Wei, welcome to the Grand Palace." Carlos extended his hand with the warmest smile he could muster. "It is an honor to have you at our hotel." Li Wei nodded politely, but immediately turned to his associates and began speaking rapidly in Mandarin. The tone was clearly questioning, perhaps even concerned. Carlos' smile froze. Pure panic flooded his nervous system. He desperately pulled out his cell phone, opening Google Translate with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Li Wei, could you repeat that in English?" Li Wei frowned and repeated something in Mandarin, gesturing toward the hotel facilities. His expression showed growing irritation. Carlos typed frantically into the app, but the translation that appeared was, "Hotel fish problem, dirty water business not good." The response was so absurd that one of the Chinese executives stifled a laugh. I'm sorry," Carlos stammered, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Our official translators will be here in an hour." Li Wei shook his head, clearly disappointed, and said something that sounded definitive to his companions. You didn't need to understand Mandarin to realize that the meeting was going down the drain. In the corner of the lobby, almost invisible pushing a cleaning cart, Janitor João Santos watched the whole scene unfold. At 34, he had grown accustomed to being treated like part of the furniture. 4 years working there, and Carlos had never even looked in his direction for more than 2 seconds. What no one there knew was that João understood every word Li Wei was saying. And what the Chinese businessman was really questioning was not the hotel facilities. He was asking if the manager was sure about the legal aspects of the investment, considering the new regulations for foreign capital in Brazil. João held the broom tightly, watching Carlos fall into despair as Li Wei began to show signs that he was considering ending the meeting. For a moment, his eyes met those of the Chinese businessman. Li Wei noticed something different in that look, an intelligence that contrasted strangely with the simple uniform and hierarchical position. There, amid the chaos of incompetence and prejudice disguised as professionalism, João maintained a calm that only exists in those who have been through much worse situations and learned that patience has its right moment to turn into action. If this story of prejudice and second chances is moving you, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happened in the next few minutes changed the lives of everyone involved forever in a way that no one could have predicted. 3 hours before that disaster, Carlos had gathered the entire cleaning team in the basement of the hotel. "I want all of you to be invisible today," he declared, pacing back and forth like a general before battle. "The customer who arrives is worth more than all of your annual salaries combined." His eyes stopped on João, who was methodically cleaning a window at the back of the room. "Especially you, João. No wandering around the social areas." "Understood." João just nodded, accustomed to this type of comment. Carlos always spoke to him as if he were deaf or mentally challenged. "That Chinese guy can't see you working. People like him are used to different standards," Carlos continued, completely ignoring the fact that João was Brazilian, just like him. What Carlos didn't know was that João Santos wasn't just a janitor who was lucky to work at a 5-star hotel. With a degree in business administration from the Federal University, specializing in international business, he had spent 2 years studying Mandarin when he dreamed of working in foreign trade. After sending out 143 resumes and going to dozens of interviews where he was always the runner-up, João learned a bitter lesson. In Brazil, his degree was worth less than the color of his skin. The job at the Grand Palace had literally been his last option before he ran out of money to pay the rent. As Carlos continued his disrespectful comments, João remembered the conversation he had had with his father last Sunday. "Son, you are 41 years old and you are still sweeping floors. This is not what I expected when I sacrificed so much to pay for your education." The pain in those words had cut deeper than any professional humiliation. His father, a retired bricklayer, had worked double shifts for 6 years to pay for his only son's college education. All the extra nights studying, all the family sacrifices, everything seemed to have been in vain. But today something different was stirring in Zhou's chest as he watched panic take over the manager. Li Wei wasn't just questioning basic aspects of the hotel. His questions were about international tax compliance, foreign investment regulations, and legal structures for corporate holding companies in Brazil. Questions that Zhou could answer by heart, thanks to 2 years working as an intern at an international consulting firm before discovering that black expert intern would never become permanent consultant. "Mr. Li Wei, please, just a few minutes," Carlos begged in the lobby, as the Chinese businessman grew increasingly irritated. Li Wei responded with a long, complex sentence in Mandarin, gesturing toward the documents in his hand. Carlos typed desperately into the translator, but the response was, "Paper number confusing hotel not good business maybe. That doesn't make any sense." Carlos exploded, his professional composure finally giving way. Zhou, who was still pushing the cart through the lobby, understood perfectly what Li Wei had said. The documents presented contain contradictory information about the corporate structure. How can I trust a partner who can't even explain his own business properly? The Chinese businessman checked his watch again and said something to his associates. Zhou immediately recognized the tone. Li Wei was communicating that they would give them 10 more minutes before considering the meeting over. Carlos continued typing frantically on his phone, sweat dripping onto the screen. "Mr. Li Wei, I'm sure we can work this out." Li Wei shook his head, clearly losing patience, and made a comment that Zhou knew would be devastating. "This level of unpreparedness is unacceptable for an investment of this magnitude. Perhaps we should explore other options." It was at that moment that Zhou made a decision that would change his life forever. 4 years of daily humiliation, 4 years of being treated like furniture, 4 years of seeing his intelligence wasted while less qualified people occupied positions he could have performed with excellence. He stopped the cart, took off his rubber gloves, and walked toward the group. Each step was a silent declaration that the invisibility imposed on him was coming to an end. Carlos, still focused on the phone, did not notice him approaching. Li Wei, however, watched with growing curiosity as this man in uniform walked directly toward them with a posture that contrasted completely with the submission everyone expected to see. What none of them knew was that Zhou had spent the last few months secretly studying Li Wei's company profile, preparing for a moment that even he didn't know would come. A moment where 4 years of patience and silent observation would become the key to rewriting not only the fate of that meeting, but the entire course of his own life. While Carlos continued his desperate struggle with technology that couldn't properly translate a complex business conversation, Zhou positioned himself a few meters away from the group. Li Wei noticed something different in that employee's eyes, an intelligence and determination that definitely didn't match the hierarchical position his uniform suggested. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. On one side, a manager in a panic trying to save his career with inadequate tools. On the other, a billionaire businessman rapidly losing patience with what he considered unacceptable professional incompetence. And in the center, a man who had been underestimated for so long that everyone forgot to ask him what he was actually good at. What happened in the next few seconds proved that sometimes justice does not come from courts or laws, but from one person's courage to decide that they will no longer be invisible, especially when they possess exactly the tools that everyone else desperately needs but never bothered to discover. Zhou took a deep breath and walked directly toward the panicked group. Each step was calculated, each movement a silent declaration that 4 years of humiliation were coming to an end. "Excuse me," he said quietly, but firmly enough to interrupt Carlos' collective despair. Carlos looked up from his cell phone, irritated. "Zhou, this is no time for cleaning. Get out of here immediately." "Actually," Zhou continued, completely ignoring the order, "I can help with the translation." An awkward silence filled the lobby. Carlos blinked several times, as if he hadn't understood the words. Li Wei watched the scene with growing curiosity. "You what?" Carlos stammered. "Zhou, you're a janitor. Get back to your work." Zhou stood up straight and addressed Li Wei directly in fluent Mandarin. "Mr. Li Wei, I apologize for the confusion. I can clarify your questions about the legal aspects of the investment you mentioned." Li Wei's eyes widened, clearly surprised. He quickly replied in Mandarin, testing Zhou's fluency. "Do you understand the tax regulations for foreign investment in the Brazilian hotel sector?" "Perfectly," Zhou replied without hesitation. "The changes implemented last year actually favor international investors like you, especially considering the holding structure your company uses." Carlos watched the conversation open-mouthed, understanding absolutely nothing, but sensing from Li Wei's expression that something extraordinary was happening. "Who is this man?" Li Wei asked in English, looking at Carlos. He takes care of the cleaning," Carlos muttered, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. Li Wei frowned. "A cleaning employee who speaks fluent business Mandarin and understands international law? That's unusual." Zhou smiled discreetly. For 4 years, he had observed dozens of business meetings in the lobby, always invisible, always underestimated. He had seen Carlos commit basic international protocol errors, witnessed misunderstandings that cost minor contracts, and witnessed arrogance that was now finally meeting its consequence. "Mr. Li Wei," Zhou continued in Mandarin, "your concerns about the documentation are valid. I can explain in detail how the proposed legal structure aligns with both Brazilian and Chinese regulations." Li Wei nodded, clearly impressed. "Continue." Zhou began a detailed technical explanation of international tax compliance, citing specific codes and making precise comparisons with similar regulations in Singapore and Hong Kong. His speech was fluid and professional, demonstrating not only mastery of the language but also a deep knowledge of international business. Carlos stood frozen, watching an employee he had treated like furniture for 4 years suddenly conduct a highly specialized conversation with a Chinese billionaire. "This is impossible," Carlos muttered to himself. Li Wei, on the other hand, was visibly excited. He asked several complex questions about tax structures, special economic zones, and bilateral investment agreements. Zhou answered them all with surgical precision. "Where did you study?" Li Wei asked in Mandarin. "Federal University, majoring in international business, with 2 years of complementary studies in Mandarin," Zhou replied. "I also worked as a foreign trade consultant before other circumstances brought me here." Li Wei shook his head, clearly confused by the situation. "A man with your qualifications working as a janitor?" Zhou shrugged elegantly. "Sometimes the job market has its own logic, especially for people like me." The phrase was spoken with such dignity that Li Wei immediately understood the unspoken implications. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Carlos. "Sir?" Li Wei asked, waiting for Zhou's last name. "Santos. Zhou Santos." "Mr. Santos, I would very much like to continue our conversation in a more appropriate setting. Perhaps in the conference room." Carlos finally regained his voice. Wait. Zhou, you can't just. I need to understand what's going on here." Zhou turned to Carlos with a calmness that bordered on frightening. "What's happening, Carlos, is that your chances of losing this 300 million investment have just turned into an opportunity to really impress Mr. Li Wei. The question is, are you going to allow me to help save your meeting, or are you going to continue treating qualified employees as if they were invisible?" The irony of the situation was delicious. Carlos, who had spent years completely ignoring Zhou, now depended desperately on skills he had never bothered to discover existed. "Zhou, when did you learn Mandarin?" Carlos asked, his voice trembling. "It was on my resume when I was hired 4 years ago," Zhou replied simply. Page 2, Additional Qualifications section. Carlos turned pale. He had never read Zhou's entire resume. Why bother learning the qualifications of a janitor? Li Wei watched the dynamic between the two men with growing interest. As an experienced businessman, he recognized when he was witnessing a dramatic shift in power. "Mr. Santos," Li Wei said in English, making sure Carlos understood, "I am very impressed with your knowledge. I would like to invite you to officially participate in this meeting as a technical consultant." Carlos swallowed hard. His job, his reputation, his entire career now depended on a man he had systematically humiliated and ignored for years. "Of course," Carlos said, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "Zhou is a valuable part of our team." Zhou bowed his head politely. "It will be my pleasure to assist with the meeting, Mr. Li Wei. I'm sure we can answer all of your questions." As the group made its way to the conference room, Zhou felt something he hadn't felt in years, the weight of being truly seen. Not as a janitor who was supposed to be invisible, but as the skilled professional he had always been. Carlos walked behind, cold sweat running down his back, realizing that his arrogant ignorance had almost cost the hotel the biggest deal in its history. Worse still, he now depended completely on the goodwill of a man he had treated like trash. Li Wei, meanwhile, made mental notes about human resource management. How could a luxury hotel have a talent like Joao Santos cleaning bathrooms for 4 years? What other skills were being wasted through sheer administrative negligence? In the meeting room, Joao took his place at the table with the confidence of someone who was finally where he should always have been. 4 years of quiet preparation, 4 years of watching and learning, 4 years of waiting for the right moment. And that moment had arrived. What Li Wei didn't know was that Joao had spent the last few months secretly studying the complete profile of Li Wei International, including its previous investments, market strategies, and contractual preferences. He was not only fluent in Mandarin, he was completely prepared to conduct one of the most important negotiations of any consultant's career. Carlos, sitting at the head of the table where he had always felt powerful, now watched nervously as Joao opened a notebook he had discreetly retrieved from his cabinet. A notebook containing years of market analysis, case studies, and professional preparation that Carlos had never suspected existed. For a moment, as Joao adjusted his reading glasses and prepared for the most important presentation of his life, everyone in the room realized they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple business meeting. They were witnessing the moment when genuine talent finally found its stage, after years of being forced to remain in the shadows by prejudice and ignorance. And that stage was about to reveal a performance that no one would ever forget. In the meeting room, Joao opened his personal laptop, and the first thing that appeared on the screen made Li Wei lean forward with genuine interest. It was a completely detailed presentation about Li Wei International, its investments in Latin America, market analyses, and growth projections for the Brazilian hotel sector. Mr. Li Wei, Joao began in fluent Mandarin, I have prepared some data that I believe is relevant to your investment considerations. Carlos watched in awe as Joao navigated through sophisticated charts, detailed financial reports, and comparative analyses that had clearly required months of specialized research. When did you prepare this? Carlos stammered. Over the last 8 months, Joao replied calmly, during my lunch breaks and weekends. I always thought it would be useful to better understand the market I work in. Li Wei asked a technical question about environmental regulations for new hotel developments. Joao responded by citing specific codes, approval timelines, and even provided a detailed comparison with similar processes in Shanghai and Beijing. Impressive, Li Wei murmured, clearly engaged. His data on urban zoning is more up to date than our own legal departments. Carlos tried to regain control of the meeting. Joao, that's very interesting, but perhaps we should focus on our official presentation. Actually, Li Wei interrupted politely, I'd rather continue listening to Mr. Santos. His analysis is exceptionally accurate. Carlos' embarrassment was palpable. Here was an employee he had treated like a piece of furniture for 4 years, conducting the most important meeting in the hotel's history with a competence he himself had never demonstrated. Joao then did something that surprised everyone. He addressed Carlos directly in Portuguese. May I suggest that you focus on the operational aspects of the hotel, while I address the technical and regulatory issues with Mr. Li Wei? The sentence was delivered with such professionalism that it sounded like collaboration, but everyone in the room understood the real dynamic. Joao was graciously taking charge of a situation that Carlos had completely lost. Of course, Carlos muttered, his authority evaporating before his very eyes. Li Wei made a remark in Mandarin about the exceptional quality of Joao's analysis, commenting that he rarely encountered Brazilian consultants with such a depth of knowledge about Asian markets. You are very kind, Joao replied modestly. I have always believed that understanding different cultural perspectives is essential for truly global business. It was then that Li Wei asked the question that would change everything. Mr. Santos, may I ask what exactly is your current position at this hotel? Joao maintained his composure, but his gaze briefly met Carlos's before he replied. Officially, I've been working on the cleaning staff for 4 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Li Wei blinked several times, processing the information. A man with your qualifications. Cleaning rooms? It's a long story, Joao said diplomatically. Li Wei turned to Carlos, his expression changing noticeably. Mr. Carlos, I must say I'm perplexed. How does an organization lose talent of this caliber for 4 years? Carlos swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Well, sometimes talent isn't immediately apparent. Not apparent. Li Wei repeated, his voice heavy with disbelief. Mr. Santos has demonstrated knowledge that would surpass many of my own senior consultants. Joao interjected gently, Mr. Li Wei, I believe the important thing now is to focus on future opportunities, not past misunderstandings. The class with which Joao was handling the situation made the contrast with Carlos' incompetence even more striking. Li Wei nodded, but his expression made it clear that he had lost considerable respect for Carlos and his management. Mr. Santos, I would like to make a proposal. How about we consider your direct participation in this investment project? What do you mean? Carlos asked, alarm evident in his voice. Simple, Li Wei replied. Any investment we make in this hotel will include the requirement that Mr. Santos be promoted immediately to a position commensurate with his qualifications. Carlos felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Not only had he nearly lost the investment through incompetence, but now he was being practically forced to promote someone he had systematically humiliated. That would be great, Carlos forced a smile that was less convincing than a counterfeit bill. Li Wei continued, and to ensure that this kind of waste of talent doesn't happen again, I would like Mr. Santos to oversee all international communications related to our investment. Joao maintained a professional expression, but inside he felt a satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't petty revenge, it was pure and simple justice, served with the elegance of someone who had always known his own worth. Mr. Li Wei, Joao said, it would be an honor to contribute to this partnership. I have some ideas about how we can create synergies between Chinese cultural expectations and the Brazilian experience of hospitality. Excellent, Li Wei smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving at the hotel. Finally, a productive business conversation. Carlos watched helplessly as Joao presented innovative proposals for cultural integration, employee training programs, and even suggestions for architectural adaptations that would specifically appeal to Asian tourists. Each of Joao's ideas was more impressive than the last, and each one further exposed the mediocrity of the management Carlos had offered for years. One last question, Mr. Santos, Li Wei said as the meeting drew to a close. If you could change one thing about this hotel to make it more attractive to international investors, what would it be? Joao smiled discreetly before replying, I would implement a real talent management system. It's amazing how many valuable resources can be hidden right under our noses, just waiting for the right opportunity to shine. The answer was given while looking directly at Carlos, who understood the subliminal message perfectly. Li Wei laughed, clearly appreciating the elegance of the response. Remarkable wisdom. I believe we will have a very productive partnership. As the meeting ended with handshakes and plans for future contracts, Carlos watched his own irrelevance crystallize. The investment was secured, but not because of his competence, despite her. Even worse, he would now have to live with the daily reminder of how his arrogance and prejudice had almost cost the hotel the biggest deal in its history. Joao, meanwhile, calmly organized his materials, knowing that he had just rewritten not only his own professional trajectory, but also set a precedent that would echo throughout the hotel. His 4 years of patience had finally found its moment, and the result was more satisfying than any impulsive revenge could have been. Li Wei said goodbye with a personal business card for Joao and a promise that the promotion would be officially discussed within the next 48 hours. When the conference room door closed behind Li Wei's group, Carlos and Joao were alone for the first time in 4 years, where the positions of power had been completely reversed. The silence between them carried the weight of 4 years of missed opportunities, wasted talent, and a lesson in humility that Carlos would never forget. Joao stood up to leave, but paused at the door. Carlos, he said softly, I hope we can work together in a more collaborative way, going forward. There was no triumphalism in his voice, just the quiet dignity of someone who had proven his worth in the most indisputable way possible. Carlos nodded silently, finally understanding that for 4 years he had held a diamond in his hands, but had been too busy being prejudiced to notice its brilliance. As Joao walked down the hallway toward the elevators, employees who had always ignored him now greeted him with newfound respect. News of the meeting was already spreading throughout the hotel, and everyone wanted to be on the right side of history when the new order was finally established. In the center of that hall where discrimination disguised as hierarchy had once reigned, a new reality was taking shape, like a symphony that finally finds its harmony after years of discordant notes, proving that true competence knows no color, social class, or limitations imposed by those who confuse privilege with superiority, and that sometimes the sweetest justice is simply allowing genuine talent to finally find its rightful stage. 6 months later, João Santos walked through the corridors of the Grand Palace no longer pushing a cleaning cart, but as Director of International Relations, with a salary that finally matched his 8 years of university education. Li Wei's investment had completely transformed the hotel. 3 new floors, an international staff, and service protocols that João had personally developed. His office, with a panoramic view of the city, proudly displayed his framed diploma, the same one that had been stored in a drawer for 4 years. Carlos, on the other hand, had been repositioned as night operations manager after an administrative restructuring requested directly by Li Wei. His arrogance had cost him not only his prestige, but also the trust of the board. "Mr. Santos," said the new intern, "the representative from Li Wei International is on line 1. João smiled, remembering the days when he was addressed only by his first name. "Put him through." In fluent Mandarin, Li Wei confirmed the expansion of the partnership to 3 more hotels in Brazil, all under João's direct supervision. At the end of the day, João ran into Carlos in the elevator. The silence spoke volumes. "Carlos," João said gently, "I hope you've learned that competence has no color, social class, or uniform." Carlos nodded, embarrassed. "João, I'm sorry for the lost years." "They weren't lost," João replied wisely. "They were an investment in patience and preparation. The best revenge is not to destroy those who underestimate us, it is to build something so great that they realize exactly what they lost by judging us by our appearance." If this story of overcoming adversity touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true talent always finds its way, even when the world insists on keeping it in the shadows.